The disappearance of Heather Elvis. The salt air of Myrtle Beach usually carries a sense of vacation and reprieve, but in December 2013 it felt heavy with a brewing storm. Heather Elvis was 20 years old, a young woman described by friends as vibrant, artistic, and fiercely independent. She was working two jobs, one at the Tilted Kilt and another at a local beauty salon, and was finally beginning to find her footing in adulthood. However, beneath the surface of her busy social life was a complicated emotional history that was about to converge in a tragedy that would captivate the nation. To understand why Heather went to Peachtree Landing that night, one must look back at the months preceding December. Heather had previously been involved in an affair with a married man, Sidney Moore. Sidney, a local maintenance worker, was significantly older, and the relationship had been a source of immense friction. When Sidney's wife, Tammy Moore, discovered the affair in October 2013, the reaction was not just anger, it was a calculated campaign of harassment. Evidence later presented in court would show that Tammy Moore took control of Sidney's phone, his schedule, and his social interactions. She began sending Heather threatening messages and even forced Sidney to call Heather in her presence to end things. By December, Heather's friends believed she had moved on. She had started seeing a new man, and on that night of December 17th, she had returned from a first date. The window of Heather's disappearance is chillingly narrow. After her date dropped her off at her apartment around 2 a.m., Heather received a series of phone calls from a payphone and from Sidney Moore's cell phone. 3:17 a.m., a call is placed from a payphone at a local gas station to Heather's phone. At 3:37 a.m., Heather calls Sidney's cell phone. They speak for several minutes. At 3:41 a.m., Heather's phone pings near her apartment as she begins to drive towards Peachtree Landing. At 3:42 a.m., a black Ford 150, later identified as belonging to the Moores, is captured on surveillance cameras moving toward the landing. Heather was lured out of her home under the impression that Sidney wanted to see her, perhaps to apologize or to tell her he was leaving his wife. Instead, she drove her dark green Saturn into a secluded boat landing surrounded by moss-draped oaks and the dark waters of Wamakee River. On the morning of December 19th, a Horry County police officer noticed a car parked at the landing. It wasn't uncommon for people to park there, but their car was abandoned. It was Heather's Saturn. The doors were locked, and the car was empty. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, and no broken glass. Just a car sitting at the edge of the water, its owner nowhere to be found. When the Elvis family arrived at the scene, the nightmare began to take shape. Heather's father, Terry Elvis, knew immediately that something was wrong. Heather didn't just go missing. She was responsible. She had work shifts scheduled and a life she was actively living. The silence from her cell phone was the first deafening alarm. In the first 48 hours, the police treated the case as a missing persons search. Divers went into the cold, murky waters of the Wamakee River, fearing Heather might have gone into the water. Canine units combed the woods, but as the Elvis family began to look into Heather's recent history, the names Sidney and Tammy Moore surfaced almost immediately. Friends told police about the harassment Heather had faced. They described Tammy's obsession with Heather, how she had allegedly posted about her on social media and sent vitriolic texts. When investigators first interviewed the Moores, the couple claimed they were home together all night. However, the digital breadcrumbs began to tell a different story. The most pivotal moment of the early investigation was the recovery of CCTV footage. While the Moores claimed to have slept all night, Cameras from the nearby business and residential security system showed a distinct black truck with a trailer hitch, matching the Moore's vehicle traveling to and from the direction of Peachtree Landing during the exact time Heather's phone went silent. Even more damning was the footage from the gas station payphone. A man matching Sidney's description was seen making a call at the exact moment Heather's phone rang. To the wall of silence the Moors tried to build was already showing cracks. In the immediate wake of Heather's disappearance, the atmosphere in the Myrtle Beach shifted from desperate hope to the calculated pursuit of justice. The search parties, comprising hundreds of volunteers wearing neon green ribbons, combed the swamps and wooded areas surrounding Peachtree Landing, but the most significant discoveries weren't being made in the mud. They were being made in a sterile laboratory at the Horry County Police Department, where the digital forensics experts were beginning to peel back the layers of a complex electronic alibi. When investigators first sat down with Sidney and Tammy Moorer, the couple presented a picture of domestic mundanity. They claimed they were home on the night of December 17th and early morning of December 18th. Tammy, in particular, was vocal, painting Heather as a stalker who wouldn't leave her husband alone. She claimed she had handled the situation and that the affair was a distant mistake and that they had moved on. However, the anomaly was the payphone. Detectives recovered footage from the gas station near the Moore's residence at 3:17 a.m. Figured matching Sidney Moore's height and gait is seen pulling up in a dark Ford 150. The figure exits the vehicle, walks to the payphone, and places a call. This call lasts only a few seconds, but significance was internal. At that exact second, Heather Elvis's phone registered an incoming call from that very payphone. The question for the investigators was simple. Why would a man who claimed to be asleep and who claimed to want nothing to do with an ex-mistress drive to a payphone in the middle of the night to call her? The answer, the prosecution would later argue, was to lure her out without leaving a direct record on his own cell phone billing statement. The science of the cell phone tower triangulation became the backbone of this tragedy. In 2013, GPS was common, but pings, the signals a phone sends to the nearest tower to maintain service, provide a map of a person's soul. Investigators mapped Heather's final movements. 3:17, receiving the pay phone call at her apartment. 3:37 a.m., a call placed from Heather's to Sidney's personal cell phone. The call lasted nearly 5 minutes. What was during those 5 minutes remains one of the case's greatest mysteries. Was a plea, a lure, or a confrontation? 3:42 a.m. Heather's phone pings a tower moving away from the apartment and toward the Wamaki River. Simultaneously, the Moore's Ford 150 was being tracked by a web of surveillance cameras. In a stroke of luck for the investigation, several local businesses and even a high-end residential gate system had high-definition cameras that captured the truck's unique features, a specific rack in the bed and a distinct trailer hitch. The truck was seen traveling toward Peachtree Landing minutes before Heather's car arrived. It was seen leaving the area shortly after Heather's phone went dark forever at 3:41 a.m. While cell phone towers showed general areas, the GPS data recovered from the Moore's vehicle and the phones provide the smoking gun. Technicians were able to retrieve data that showed the truck didn't just drive near the landing, it drove to the landing. The data suggests a terrifying synchronicity. As Heather pulled her Saturn into the gravel lot of a secluded boat ramp. The Moores were already there or arriving within seconds. The isolation of Peachtree Landing in the winter is absolute. There are no streetlights or only the sound of the river and the wind through the cypress trees. It was a perfect stage for a crime with no witnesses. With the digital evidence mounting, a search warrant was executed at the Moore's home on the Briar Cliff Acres. What investigators found was not a crime scene in a traditional sense, but a house of secrets. They found evidence of Tammy's obsession, handwritten notes detailing Heather's movements, printouts of Heather's social media photos, messages sent from Tammy to Heather that were so vitriolic they bordered on demonic. Tammy had allegedly forced Sidney to engage in performative acts of loyalty, including a notorious photo of Sidney in handcuffs, a joke they claimed, a tattoo of Tammy's name on his person. The prosecution began to build a profile of Tammy Moore as the alpha in the relationship, a woman who felt her territory had been invaded and who was determined to cleanse her life of the intruder. Back at Peachtree Landing, forensics team processed Heather's car. They found her purse, her phone charger, and her makeup, everything a 20-year-old woman would need for a normal day. The car was not trashed, it was parked. The lack of forensic evidence inside the car suggests that whatever happened to Heather happened outside the vehicle. Did she step out to talk? Was she snatched? The silence of the car was the most haunting part of the investigation. There was no blood, there was no signs of struggle. It was as if she had simply evaporated into the humid South Carolina air.